add anything with sugar, like fruit, to it in secondary, you basically are fermenting dry, so the fermentation is stopped, and then you're adding sulfites and sorbate to keep any yeast that's in there. And even if it's brilliantly clear, there's yeast in there. It doesn't take a lot for them to spark back up and get it going again. So, basically you're stabilizing it, allowing or keeping the yeast from re-fermenting when you add sugar back into it. Third option, and we'll get more into these, Brent. Third option is instead of fermenting dry and stabilizing, you're halting fermentation. A lot of the time that means cold crashing, so you're bringing the temperature, say, down to 32. Yeast stop their activity. You add your sulfites and your sorbate, so it doesn't allow them to start re-fermenting when it warms back up. And then if there's residual sugar or you're going to add it, you don't have an issue. Another option is hit your alcohol tolerance. So every yeast has an alcohol tolerance. This is with mead, usually not. The alcohol tolerance is listed on the package, so don't believe that. We take care of our yeast because we have to as mead makers, which means they will shoot past that alcohol tolerance that White Labs or Lallemand or whatever says it's going to be. But if it does hit its alcohol tolerance, if you do not change anything in the mead, then it should be stable. But that means you don't later change anything by adding any kind of ingredient that might throw that off. And then the last one, filtration. You can, if you remove all of the yeast, then it won't be able to re-ferment. I think I have pasteurization on this one, which I haven't done, but works for commercial cideries, I know. So those are your options. There may be something I missed, but I think those are the most common. So I'll open it up to the panel to talk about what they've found works, doesn't work, or what they prefer to do. Pete, we'll start with you.
Okay, so I think the most reliable way for folks at home to get their mead stabilized is to go to complete dryness, sulfite, sorbate. There's a metric ton, I almost said something there that I shouldn't have, of calculators out there on the internet that can help you figure out, based on pH and sugar level, how much sulfite to use. And please do not measure stuff with a teaspoon or a tablespoon. Get a gram scale, get a sub-gram scale, and do it right. Because this is where I see most of the flaws, is people go, yeah, a teaspoon or a tablespoon of sulfite in a batch of mead, 5-gallon batch of mead, you're good. Sorry, that ain't true. So do your diligence, get the right equipment. These are advanced mead makers here, or most of you are. Time to start investing in that equipment to do it right. Because one thing you don't want to do is take a bad mead out and give it to people and have them go, this is mead? This is terrible. Because you're doing yourself and the industry a disservice when you do that. So go to full dryness, sulfite, sorbate, give it a couple of weeks just to make sure that you got the numbers right. Because a lot of times what will happen is if you're under, you'll find that you get some kind of activity in there that you really didn't anticipate. Better to give it a couple of weeks before you make everything permanent by corking it and sealing it however you're going to seal it. Give it time to stabilize. You also want to give those corks in the bottle, if you're using corks, time to expand back out and give you a good seal.
One of the resources that's online, Pete said there's stuff out there to find the exact amounts. The one I use is actually Reddit. It's the only reason I use Reddit is just that page. Reddit, Mead, Stabilization. Fantastic write-up that someone did. Carvin, what do you think?
I would say for the most part, I like to target a gravity. So, for example, I'll ferment that mead dry. So why do I do it that way? Alcohol, ABV, whatever you want to call it, destroys esters. So, back when we all first started making mead, we wanted to make the biggest, baddest, most alcoholic mead that we possibly can. We've all been there. It's good, but it's hot. Well, those fusels that come off that mead, it destroys the aromatics of the mead. So I like to target an ABV. So for my fruit meads or for my melomels, I try to go no higher than 12, maybe 14. Because what I have found is the volatiles from the alcohol play real well with the fruit and what spices and so whatever I'm going to use. So in order for me to do that, just about any mead yeast out there is going to take you past 14%. And I think last year I used 47 different varieties of mead yeast, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. So I target whatever ABV I want, and I can do that because I ferment dry, I stabilize that, and then I back sweeten. And there's formulas. Billy was talking about the stabilization worksheet. So on a Modern Mead Makers group in our file section, we have a stabilization spreadsheet. We also have a back sweetening spreadsheet. So when you ferment that mead dry, it's going to be at 0.99 or 1.00. So how do I get that back to 1015 or 1020 or whatever gravity that I want? Well, there's formulas for that. We can tell you if you have this many gallons, you need to add this much honey, so on and so forth. So being able to ferment dry and stabilize gives you a lot of different options, because there's times where I will, because I'm cheap, I might ferment with a wildflower, but I'll back sweeten it with a metaphone. Or I might make a pineapple mead. Well, what's a great honey to go with pineapple? Tupelo. But I'm not going to ferment with Tupelo. Nobody knows the difference. They think they do, but they don't. So that's the reason why I ferment dry and stabilize. One, I'm cheap. And two, I'm able to target gravities that I want. And I make a lot of session meads too as well. So that 5-6%, just about every yeast out there is going to get you past that. So I only give it enough sugar to get to 8%. Back sweeten it to about 10, carbonated, put it on tap in 10 days. Done, over with. So.
Jared?
Yeah, so we've done pretty much all that except for the pasteurization. And we have, I believe, only had one bottle bomb before I worked there, but I know that before me, it was something that we had fermented it completely dry. It went into like a bourbon barrel, I believe, and then it picked up some kind of something in the bourbon barrel that when we took it out and bottled it, they blew it. No, we just nothing blew it, but we just took it off and we were using that for something else for a while. But so even if you're doing something where you might not even expect it to pick up any sugar or whatever else, it still can. I'll say that occasionally, if you're using sulfite, sorbate doesn't really change or add any flavor or have any off compounds or whatever, but sulfite can, if you're using maybe too much, or sometimes we've used what we thought was the right amount, but it's just left a really sulfite-y aroma, really harsh aroma, that'll oftentimes go away on its own, just over the course of a few days or maybe a week or two or something. But we've had a couple occasions where it just was relentless and would not, that aroma would not come out at all. And there's ways to get rid of that. Regulus is something you can use that takes sulfite basically out of solution, which worked for us the one time we needed to use it. So there's that kind of something to think about as well. It might not be immediately like what you want because there's that sulfite kind of pop that you get from it, but yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree with weighing everything out. To me, that's really, really important, is having those accurate measurements, especially with sulfites and sorbate, if that's what you're using. We use a lot of filtration also to take out any kind of leftover anything in the mead, and we use a 2.5 micron, which is a sanitary filtration, and we use lenticular modules for that work really. You can get those on a pretty small scale. So
Nominal or absolute?
what's that?
Nominal or absolute?
I do not understand.
For the filtering,
Yeah.
I've seen your filter. I think it's absolute.
Okay, absolute.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's 0.25, right?
Yeah.
2.5
2.5?
microns, yeah.
Okay.
Which is smaller than, it should take out all the yeast.
Yeah.
Yeast is about
And
4
proteins.
microns.
And-
So
Yeah.
bacteria and things are smaller. It's not sterile.
You're thinking 0.25. 0.45 will take out most yeast. 0.25 is absolute
0.25 is
sterile
absolute.
filtration.
Yeah. I think you're 2.5.
Yeah.
One point on the sulfite too, one other thing that will remove it that you need to know about is oxygen, right? O2 binds with SO2. So if you if you've stabilized a mead and let's say you leave it open to oxygen, that the sulfite levels in that mead will start to reduce, and to the point where it may mean that it could re-ferment because you're basically pulling out all of the stabilization chemicals that you put in there. That makes sense. So just know that you shouldn't be leaving a finished meat out to exposed air anyways, but if you do, like leave a lot of headspace and you don't have a good way to purge it, that could happen.
Just a few other things to add on this. Sometimes, people get so caught up in the SO2 and stabilization. I made a lot of good meads before I started stabilizing my meads too. So just keep that in mind. Don't get too caught up in the science, because it can be as easy as complicated as you want to be. But to touch on what Billy was saying, SO2 falls into two ranges: free SO2 and bound SO2. So anytime I transfer my mead or rack my mead, anytime that it's going to be moving, I test my SO2 levels to see how much free SO2 I have left in my mead. And I will normally adjust my meads to make sure that my SO2 levels are where I need them, because I set on my meads a long time. I'm a dad, grandpa, business owner. So sometimes they might set in a carboy or fermentation vessel, for months before I get to them. So if they've been sitting for a while, I make sure to go in there and test and make sure I adjust the SO2 levels, because I spent a lot of time and money on that meat. I don't want to lose it. I don't want it to become oxidized. But so I protect my investment by going in there every once in a while and testing my SO2 levels to make sure that they're adequate till they can age appropriately.
That's a really good point. Kind of what I was alluding to earlier about getting the right equipment so that, listen, you're spending a lot of money on honey. Let's face it. Honey ain't cheap. I used to be able to get, when I first started doing this, I used to be able to get a 5-gallon bucket of honey for about $40. Sometimes less, depending on what it is. 5-gallon bucket of honey now, depending on what you're getting, can be as high as, $600, $700, $800. That's a lot of money. If you're going to be throwing that kind of money at honey, along with your time, the effort that it takes to make it, and then the time after you've done it to adjust it and get it to the point of where you want to make it, take the time to buy some good instrumentation so you can measure things. The day of pitch and pray is well past us. I got to admit to feeling jealous, because when I first started doing this, I had 4 choices for yeast. We'd go down to the local winery, we'd get a block of sherry yeast, a block of Bordeaux yeast, a block of Burgundy yeast, or a block of Sauterne yeast. That was it. We'd into the wine, and when I was making mead, it would be into the mead. And all of these resources are out there for a reason. It's because people over the years found out that they actually work. So do not be afraid to go out there and look in 2 or 3 different places. Because a lot of times, everybody thinks what's on the internet is true. Well, a lot of it isn't. Matter of fact, I'd say most of it when it comes to mead lately. But, spend the time, do the diligence, compare notes from different websites, and see where things fall in. Measure your stuff, get it right. One quick word on sulfates when it comes to making melomels. There is an enzyme that is an antioxidant called polyphenol oxidase, or PPO. It competes with it competes with the yeast for oxygen. And as you know, oxygen is very important during the early fermentation. By adding SO2, you bind that polyphenol oxidase action and give your yeast a better shot at getting the O2 to uptake it for early fermentation.
Yes, sir. So what do you think is the type of equipment that meat makers can.
You know, hydrometers. Get those. Get a gram scale. Get a sub-gram scale. An SO2 meter if you can afford it. And anything past that, I mean, is really, you know, getting really into it. I was a
pH.
microbiology, yeah.
pH and a
meter.
TA meter.
Yeah. You know, I was a microbiology with a chemistry major, so to speak. And so that kind of stuff I'm used to doing. But a lot of people don't know it, and they're kind of intimidated by it. It's just numbers. So take your time, learn about it, get some good reference material, learn about the chemical interactions, and then, you know, make your mead. And like Carvin said, don't turn, you know, sulfite and sorbate and stabilization and the science of mead making into a religion. Because once you start doing that, then you're not going to be listening to anybody else's opinion, because it's something that you're going to hold on to, and you're never going to be wrong about it. So always stay open to new stuff.
People don't do that.
Yeah.
You know, I learned winemaking from my grandpa in Louisiana, and you know, guy made dandelion strawberry peach wine, and I don't think he knew what a damn sorbate was, and it's good. You know, so once again, don't get too carried away. You know, as with anything, you know, if he was like, well, I want to make it traditional. Well, if you gave a Viking an M16 device a bow and arrow, I'm pretty sure he's going to take the M16. You know, so yeah, you know, you can. There's always room to improve, but you know, it doesn't mean that you can't make stuff traditional and it still tastes good. Is basically what I'm trying to say. But yeah, there's science for a reason. It gets it to be better. So.
All right, let's go. Anthony, you got a question?
Yeah, just a question. So with cold crashing alone, that's not going to.
It'll halt fermentation. So if you then take that, keg it up, put it in your kegerator, and serve it, and keep it cold the whole time. Yeah, it's not going to re-ferment, but bottle it, take it out and it warms up. Yeah, it will re-ferment.
Exactly. Sorry, don't really. But can you talk a little bit about dusting and to what are you talking about?
So when at the commercial level and winemakers, you know, are doing this every day, when you're adjusting SO2, you basically need an SO2 meter and a pH meter. But once you've added the sulfites, you go in and you're just testing the levels of sulfite in there, because they will change over time. So
as they combine with other chemicals.
Exactly. Yeah.
And the two main components of that is potassium sorbate and potassium metasulfite. Those are really the two chemicals that you are adding. And you know, I've over sulfited stuff many times in my life. To me, the chemical that you got to worry about is potassium sorbate, because you will get something called geranium taint, and it's horrible. It's just a horrible, rancid, nasty smell that you're just not going to get out of that meat. So
Over sorbating?
Yeah, you got to be careful with sorbate.
What is the safe level for that?
If you want to be safe, go online, find a calculator, invest in a pH meter, and invest in a sulfite meter. Before I stabilize anything, I get the pH and I measure how much SO2 is there. There's ways to estimate that. You know, I didn't always have fancy equipment, so yeah, I ghettoed it sometimes. And it worked, but now that I got fancy equipment, I just measure it every time. So there were some assumptions that I was able to make, because I've made a lot of batches of mead. So if I'm making a traditional with this honey, you know, I've used it for years. I can make some assumptions. I just don't make those assumptions anymore because I've lost too much good meat. So sure. I just took a couple $100 and bought some nice tools, and I just measure now.
The other thing to be aware of too is if you're barrel aging versus in a carboy with a bung under an airlock, you're going to want to test your SO2 more frequently while it's in the barrel, because you're getting ullage and oxygen penetration where you're getting less of that in a glass carboy with an airlock.
You know,
along the assumption lines, wine was making racking down it contains some. I guess they test it, but they don't want the total sulfite addition. Generally, the assumption.
Yeah, they have some laws. The commercial people have laws. You know, some people can detect it if it's above a certain threshold, but I think legally there's a limit, 150, 200 parts per million or something like that.
But each time they're doing additions of sulfite where they're racking it over, so whatever they do, say it's 20 grams.
That is correct. And you know what? We're not talking about much. It doesn't take a lot of these chemicals. That's why you really need a good skill. You know, we're talking about on average, maybe for 5 gallons, a fourth a teaspoon of potassium metasulfite, and that's probably right around a gram
gram to a gram and a half.
gram to a gram and a half.
And it really depends. This is why pH and the sulfite levels you're going to add go hand in hand. Because if something's at pH 3.5,
You don't need that much, though.
You don't need that much. If something's at pH 4.0, it's like 1.5 times what you would have needed at pH 3.5, right? So there's a big difference. And as the pH goes up, it incrementally kind of, hockey stick goes up with the amount you need. So you need to know pH.
And that's really important when you're making additions because, as Carvin mentioned earlier, there are people that have a fairly low threshold for being able to sense sulfite in solutions. So 50 parts per million is the general audience that you're looking at there. There's some folks in the crowd that can sense it down to about 30 parts per million. And there's some people that are just insane that can do it lower than that. So
We all have that
aware.
friend.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, we got to move on to the next one. And for these other topics, we'll get through them a little quicker so we can open it up. Everyone get their question answered. So with balance, this, if you haven't read the BJCP Mead study guide, it's online. Just search it. There's a PDF. Pete was one of the authors in doing that. It explains balance in mead better than anything I've found. And it breaks down the concept of balance and then all of the components. And you really need to get familiar with all the components to know how to really perfect a mead post-fermentation. So what we're talking about is sweetness, acidity, tannins, alcohol, carbonation, and body. Right? Yes. And the thing is, you adjust one, it changes the other, right? So it's not just like, oh, I always add this much acid to my meads. It's, okay, if I do this, where does it affect the sweetness? If I'm adding tannins, how does that play with everything else? A little carbonation, okay, I have some carbonic acid, changes the body, all this other stuff. So they'll play hand in hand, and that's why it's important to know all of the components. I mentioned those resources. There was a, well, if you aren't an AMA member, it says Mazer Cup presentation. It should say AMA conference presentation. Vicky would yell at me if she was here. So it's, if you go on there and you're not an AMA member, first of all, become an AMA member. Then you can download those presentations. There's some fantastic ones on balance that the last year, Eric Lowe from Meridian Hive did a great one with acid and tannin balance. But there's a bunch of them. Anyways, you can download them. It's not that expensive. So that's just kind of an intro to the balance, and then we'll actually get into each one, and I'll open it up to the panel when we do that. If you want to move to the next one. We'll start with acid, because that's where a lot of people go straight for when they're trying to tweak a mead. So there's different types of acid you can use that are most commonly used to balance a mead. There's tartaric, which is what you'll find in grape wine. That's the primary acid. Malic from apples, and citric. Took a guess and just put citrus up there. And they really do have different flavors and effects. Malic, you're going to get a lot of green apple, citric. You overdo it, you're going to get like sour candy and tartaric. As far as I know, is most often used with mead, especially melomels. But it can be pretty harsh if you overdo it. So, and then of course there's citrus in fruit. So if you've ever had a Schramm's mead, right? Very, very, like a lot of residual sugar, but a ton of acidity from the fruit he uses, and together it makes this amazingly delicious mead, and it's very well balanced. And he doesn't add any acid. He just lets the fruit and the honey come together and do it. So common fruit for that I have listed up there. Those aren't the only ones, but those are some common ones people use to add acidity to a mead. So guys, we'll start over the Superstition guys. Any things you usually do to have balance acid, or you just let it do its thing?
Just let it do
Yeah,
its thing.
we've never adjusted acid
Okay.
before. Yeah, but we do use a lot of fruit.
Yeah.
So yeah, just I guess balancing the honey and the fruit initially to kind of get that balance.
And I'll plug our collab mead here that's on tap. Key lime pie mead. The acidity in that is fantastic. Very acidic fruit, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's perfect for a mead that you can have some residual sugar in.
Mm-hmm.
Yay! This is like one of my favorite subjects because I don't like using acid. So how do I get around that? A lot of times when I'm making a mead, I'll make that mead with 3 to 4 different yeasts, and I'll blend that mead back together. So that's one way that I handle it. I'll also use fermentation tannins and oak tannins in primary when I know that I'm making a mead that is going to need a little bit more acidic bite on the end. Like one of the things I do for my Orange Blossom traditionals is I put medium toast French oak in the primary at a half an ounce per gallon. And that gives me that tannin on the back end that I need, and it gives me that little acidic bite. And of course, Orange Blossom is an acidic honey too as well. Another thing that I will do a lot of times when I'm making a fruit mead and even a traditional mead is I'll blend. I treat honeys like brewers treat grains. You don't know what you don't know. So I'll blend those honeys to get the taste profile and an acidic profile that I need. I know that Orange Blossom has a little acidic bite. I know that avocado has a little acidic bite. I'll use heather, and most time people don't even know I put heather in it because I'm using it as an adjunct for a little bit more acidic bite. So it comes to me to recipe design and knowing what you want on the end. And I also use carbonation as an acidic additive. Like I know that I don't want to over adjust that mead because I know I'm going to carbonate it and put it on tap. So I can't overdo the acid. So it's just having an overall picture of what you want to do and what you want that outcome to be. And also knowing your fruits and knowing your honeys. You know, I know that currants are very acidic. You know, I usually never go over 2 pounds per gallon when I'm making a currant mead. I know if I do that, I'm going to have to back sweeten that thing to like 1060 or 1070. I don't want the diabetes. So I'll cut back on my currant. So you really just got to know your fruit and know what you're dealing with and have that vision in mind. And don't be afraid, folks, to make honey and fruit are expensive. I make a lot of 1 gallon batches. If you see a big pretty picture from me online, trust me, I've made that mead about 6 or 7 times in a 1 gallon batch before I skilled it up because my wife would kill me. You know, that's like I'm gonna spend $700 on a batch of black currant mead. Like, you better get that right. So yeah, she doesn't fuss too much after that. So that's the kind of way I do it. But every once in a while, when I get to that point, I will use acid. But for me, I am that friend. I can usually taste it. It just does something to my mouth. So I'll use it only as a last resort, and then I'll serve it on tap, and it'll never leave my house, and people don't know what they're drinking anyway. So that's my take.
I think one of the really great ways to get that acid and tannin into your mead, obviously, is the fruit. You want to make sure if you're using that fruit to maximize your extraction, and that means extended maceration. Maceration just means on the fruit. So you put your fruit into the mead and fruit sits in the mead. The longer it sits in there, the more it extracts. But after about 14 to 18 days, it becomes a balancing act. You want to make sure that you start lowering the temperature, keep any kind of microbial activity way down to keep yourself from getting an infection in that mead. You also want to start using enzymes. Enzymes will help to maximize the extraction of color, tannin, and acid into that mead from the fruit that you're using. There are any number of different kinds of pectinase and fruit enzymes that you can use to break that down. I'm a particular fan of the Lalamon products, Lalzyme EX, and a couple of the others that they have out there. It makes a difference in the extraction. And the longer you have it in there, the more of an extraction you're going to get. You eventually reach a point of diminishing returns. So you just want to, be out there and do some active tasting. That's the art of it. The science is using the additives to get that extraction. The art is tasting it to where it's just right, and that's when you pull the fruit out and finish up. As an example, for anybody that wants to see what an extended maceration is like in a grape wine, there is a 2014 bottle of Petite Syrah by Carlisle that was extended maceration in excess of 56 days. That is a hell of a long time to keep your fruit in your juice without it turning on you. So you have to be careful. Like I said, it's a balancing act, kind of like a cold soak on steroids, basically. So the longer you keep it in there, the more color, the more tannin, the more acid you're going to get, the more fruit flavor you're going to get, and the better balance you're going to get in your mead. And like Carvin said, do not be afraid to mix up your honeys and mix up your meads. A lot of times you have a mead that's mediocre, you mix it with one that's pretty good, and all of a sudden you've got something that's better than the sum of two parts. So blend, experiment, try different things. It'll make your mead making better, it'll make your mead better.
Some of those tannins are and
Next slide.
okay.
Yeah.
All right. Darn it.
One last thing on acid. Don't think just because it's sweet it has to be balanced with acid. Go by what flavor you're trying to get. Some people just feel if it's very, very sweet mead, it has to have that acid balance. Well, if you're going for like a chocolate coconut, dessert mead, and you try and balance it with acid, it just comes out weird. I think that kind of flavor profile, is desserty, sweet desserty, not acidic desserty. But if you're doing something that maybe could have acid in the ingredients already, then adding acid usually is a little, it's a little more friendly to the mead. If that makes sense. Okay.
And one more personal peccadillo. If you're going to be adding acid to your mead, do it in really small doses and do it in a test batch of your mead first. Take off a couple 150 ml, dose it a little bit, measure what you put in, taste it, see what it's like. My advice is to stay away from acid blend, tartaric, malic, and citric. It tastes like somebody emptied a pixie stick into your mead. And to me, the signature for that is just all over my tongue. It feels like somebody's taking 1,001 little needles and going all over my tongue. So citric acid is great if you're making a citrus mead, but if you got a melomel, or if you're just bringing up the sharpness in the mead, take a look at tartaric, but go with a light hand.
There's a spreadsheet. I think it's on Meadmaker's Tom.
Yep.
I think uploaded it. It's fantastic if you do want to acid balance and you want to do like Pete said, little tiny samples and see what happens. It's a whole spreadsheet that if you make this solution and you add this many drops, how many would you add to a 1 gallon?
Yeah.
Where's that spreadsheet?
It's on a Modern Mead Makers Forum, and it was made by Jeremy Beltz. He's a good guy.
All right. Now we'll get to Carvin's tannins. So everyone knows tannins. What we're talking about here. I mean, there's a reason that well, it's not the only reason, but red wine being aged in oak and then needing to age, you have these wonderful tannins already from the grapes and then being added from the oak, and it does fantastic things to beverages. It also can mean that you need to age it, because tannins can start harsh and change over time. So I think Pete might have said this, that the oak and mead, or tannins in mead, is a better marriage than in any other beverage. Was that you?
Yeah.
And I agree.
Definitely.
I agree. So I love messing with tannins, fermentation tannins, finishing tannins, oak aging, all of it. So you have some options. There are tannins in fruit skins, so you need to know that going in. Is this a berry that's going to make it very tannic, or is this not going to add any tannins? You have fermentation tannins. I think Carbon FT Blanc Soft you've used. I know that. I think Meridian Hive, some other guys use that. There's finishing tannins. My two favorites, Royal and Radiance. It doesn't substitute for like oak aging, but it's extracted from either American or French oak, and it can add a very nice supplement of structure to a mead that you wouldn't get if you didn't add any oak. I think I use them all the time. I think they're fantastic. And then you have your oak, French, Hungarian, American. We're not going to get, that could be a whole hour and a half in itself. There's books written about it. A good one, Wood and Beer, is pretty much you can take a lot of that and just use it for mead. But that's a fantastic book if you really want to get into oak, what it can do, the different types. And then toast levels are going to play a factor into the flavor profiles that it adds as well. What do you guys do, if anything, for tannin additions? I know you guys have a huge barrel program.
Yeah,
we've got like 150 barrels, I think, right now.
Yeah.
And
all different sorts of toast levels. French, American oak, all kinds of stuff. We just have fun with it, really, I think.
Yeah. I mean, we'll use so we just did like our collaboration with Bottle Logic was a Nutella inspired mead, and we used Belgian dark candy syrup in it. And for something like that, we used a heavy toast, which gives it a different tannic quality than something that's like a lighter medium toast. We'll use those for lighter things. We just put like a saison apricot mead into French oak, which is also very good. But it's a completely different. Like the toast level does mean a lot. I'd say that the darker it is, the kind of the softer the tannins are. We got some heavy char barrels that are like what you'd put like bourbon in, like if like bourbon companies will buy these new barrels that are like charred out, and we've gotten very little from those barrels. Actually, we're really surprised by that. It seems like the lighter, would you agree? The lighter toast is like the lighter it is, the more tannin you get.
More stringent.
More stringency you're going to get out of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So like the heavier toast is like a softer tannin quality. But that's about it. I mean, other than just naturally from the fruit, which we kind of just let that do what it does. If we're getting tannin from fruit, it's just kind of a byproduct, I guess. We're not necessarily trying to extract more than we need to from it, I suppose. But most of our tannins come from barrels. Yeah.
Carvin, you actually, I should have explained this. Will you explain what tannins do to a mead? How does it balance it?
Absolutely. I love this stuff. First of all, this guy right here probably has one of the best articles on the internet when it's for oaking levels in mead. It's on the Modern Mead Makers Forum, but whenever I start to need to freshen up on my oak, I always read Pete's article. So he has a really nice article about oaking levels in meads and stuff like that. So he's inspired me to do a lot with oak. So fermentation tannins, because if you've had a mead from me in the last 5 years, I use fermentation tannins in all my meads, even a traditional mead. For me, what they do is they make the mead seems bigger than what they are. They do give it some astringency, but it also increases the polysaccharide production, and it gives that mead like a full flavor. Like you're drinking that big cab, and it just fills up your mouth. Well, you can take a lot of those techniques and you can apply it to a traditional mead or a fruit mead. You ever had this really great traditional mead and it's kind of watery? It's like it just needs some body. So these fermentation tannins really give you mead a lot of body. So for a traditional mead, some of the fermentation tannins that I like to use, my main one is FT Blanc Soft. I love that for my traditionals. It gives them this really distinct mouthfeel. It just really fills up your mouth. And it also gets me around having to do those acid adjustments on the back end. So two of the things I love to use in my traditional meads are FT Blanc Soft, and I also use another additive called Opti White. So both of those really help the mouthfeel. And I usually use between a 1/4 ounce to a 1/2 ounce of medium toast French oak. I just love the way that French oak plays with traditional meads. And I'll change those tannins a little bit when it comes to fruit meads. Like one of my favorite ones for berries and dark berries is FT Rogue Berry. There's another fermentation tannin. FT stands for fermentation tannin. So Scott's Lab makes a whole line of those. I would say get those and you can play around with them. Actually, when I first got them, I mixed them with water and I just consumed them. You know, make sure you have a couple beers ready. But when you do that, it's not a very pleasant experience, but it gives you a really good idea of what these tannins will add to your particular mead. One of the great things we have in mead, when you make a beer, you either get it right or you don't. With mead, you can sit there and tweak and tweak and tweak. There's a lot of times where I'll make a mead and I'm never in a rush. I'll just sit on it. I'll keep sampling and sampling. I'm like, let me just take a little bit of some of the Lux finishing tannins. Let me put some on some Hungarian oak. Let me put some on some French oak. And, and a lot of times I'll split that mead out and I'll use French, Hungarian, and American at different toast levels, and I'll blend them back together. And then the complexity, it just gets crazy. Sometimes I got to cut myself off. It's just sit there and just tinker all day long. But yeah, it's a whole new world out there with fermentation tannins. The Vikings would have used them. I'm sure of it. It'd have made better mead. Definitely a better braggot. So that's my take on fermentation tannins.
They would have deforested the north if they could have to get all that stuff. The fermentation tannins are just a wonderful thing for mead. One of the things you can do is call Scott Labs. They have an actual tannin kit that you can buy from them. So you can take your finished meads or the meads that you're getting ready to ferment, or if you just have honey must, and add that into them and taste where they are. That way you save yourself a little bit of experimentation if you don't want to lose a lot out of the batch that you have. I don't know, I think they're less than $100. I think they have 5 or 6 of them in there. I can't remember. It's been a while since I ordered any. But as Carvin was saying, the FT Blanc Soft used to be called Tannin Gallo Cool, white fluffy tannin, oak gall tannin. It comes from a gall nut on an oak tree, or the oak galls, the little things that grow on them. It patches in wonderfully to mead, and it gives a really complex character to it. I guess that's one of the things that because honey doesn't have tannin in it naturally, adding the tannin in early helps, as Carvin was mentioning, about the mouthfeel, as well as color stabilization and stabilization of the mead and clearing of the mead as well. You get long chain polypeptides and cross-linking. It gives you stabilization of color with the anthocyanin. It does a lot of wonderful things for your mead. If you're making melamellas, you probably want that so your color stays nice and stable. You don't get that oxidative browning over the course of time. It also adds a degree of softness, a degree of complexity, putting in different types of tannin, as he was talking about, either by using oak or by using the tannin additives. Will give you angular tannin and fine grained tannin on the end that you'd get on some of the classic Bordeaux's or the Burgundies from France. It all goes into making a super complex mead, and that's what it's all about, is blending back. finding the stuff that you like and making it work.
Yeah, question, but one is on fermentation tank, but we are talking about secondary or et cetera primarily today, but fermentation tank is going to primary?
Primary.
Okay, so I just wanted to clarify
Yeah.
that. And are they in liquid form or are they?
Some of them are a powder, some of them are in liquid. They go right in at onset of fermentation, after you've sulfited and after you've added your enzyme. Depending on, there's also finishing tannins. He just mentioned 2 of them there.
Right. And then the second question is, we're talking about oak, et cetera, and you were talking about quarter ounce, or, quarter to half an ounce, per gallon, et cetera. Are you, from my ignorance here, but are you talking about tannins that have been additive that is extracted tannin from oak, or are you talking about like an oak chips in the second?
I was talking about cubes, so that was
Cubes, okay.
yeah. So I use cubes. I love cubes, and for long-term aging, if I can't con some meadery out of a barrel, I'll use staves.
And so you were talking about like I think you said medium toast levels, and then how long would you typically leave the oak in your secondary?
And it depends. I trust this little device right here. I sample a lot. I'm a firm believer of sampling. I love my sample ports, and just so much of this just isn't science. I get to drink every day. You just gotta trust your gut. It's just nothing's gonna tell you that. Sometimes I'll start off fermentation. You'll get to the point when you're making beer, mead, cider, wine, whatever. I'll know 4 or 5 days into fermentation whether I need to add more fruit. I like making those adjustments as soon as possible. I don't like waiting. So if you make the same batch of mead over and over again, you'll begin to learn what it tastes like at the different stages of fermentation. So I'll make those adjustments quick, especially with a lot of my meads so far as oaking levels. Well, quarter ounce is enough because honey varies from year to year. Fruit varies from year to year. You can have that recipe down pat, but all those variables are not always going to be the same. That fruit does not have as much acidity as it had last year, so I got to adjust it. So it's like a game of cooking. So it's awesome.
What's a good supplier for patient tannins?
Scott Labs is where a lot of these products are found.
Yeah, you can go to Beer and morebeer.com. Actually, morewinemaking.com will have tannins on. They sell them in smaller doses for like single batches.
Crush to Cellar too. They have the widest selection of yeast and fermentation tannins that I've seen online. Crush to Cellar.
Through the e-commerce site for Scott.
Scott's Lab.
Yeah.
One more oak source that I don't think a lot of people know is it's called Evoke, EVOAK with some kind of weird symbol in there somewhere. Just go to their website, check out what they have, and you'll want to buy everything. They do some cool stuff. Larry, you had a question?
Pete mentioned adding oak when you sulfite it. Fermentation, did you sulfite that? Maybe it just came out.
No, generally I add oak in the primary and secondary, and sulfite is the first treatment that I'll do. It goes in. You want to give it 8 hours before you add any enzyme, or if you're going to put bentonite in, because the bentonite, and you put in the sulfite followed by the enzyme, and if you're going to add bentonite in primary, then you add bentonite afterwards with the space of about 8 to 10 hours each. And then the oak.
All right. Carbonation, we'll kind of breeze through this one. Carbonation does not equal session meads. Just making that clear for some reason, people think you only carbonate session meads, and if it is carbonated, it's a session mead. And I'm doing my part to try and break that association. A little more of us on the West Coast are doing that, but you do not need to make every traditional mead still and every session mead carbonated. But what carbonation does is it does give it some perceived body. It adds carbonic acid, so dries it out a little bit, perceived dryness, and can balance the other components in interesting ways. And then you have really two types of carbonation. You can bottle condition, which is really hard to do with mead, right? Because the reason beer can do it is there's unfermentables in beer. So you have residual sugar, you have this stout, and it's got all this residual sugar that the yeast is not going to eat. So if I put some simple sugar in there, bottle it up, the remaining yeast will eat that and create carbonation, no problem. With a mead, it's all simple sugars, right? So I bottle it, and there's however much residual sugar. It is going to use up all of that, which means unless you timed it perfectly, and you just got that little bit left of residual sugar and then bottled it, anything more than that, and that's how you get bombs. So much easier to force carb with mead. If you just really, really love those tiny little bubbles and only bottle condition, then there are meaderies that do it. Golden Coast, I don't know if they still do it, but that's how they started doing it for years. Well, here we go. Chris, do you guys still bottle condition or? No?
Yeah, we force.
Yeah. They started out bottle conditioning, and it is a hard thing to get consistent. So I don't know if other than Hydron, anyone is bottle conditioning.
Very few.
Yeah. You guys have anything you want to add to carbonation?
It's a pain in the ass if you're trying to do method championnat. Yeah, I was talking to Carvin about this before we got here today, and be prepared for a 3-year, commitment. If you're making true method championnat sparkling mead, you're going to want to have 3 base meads, nice and dry, and then over the course of time, you're going to start blending and tasting those. And then the whole, dosage and tirage, basically inoculating the bottle again so that you get those nice tiny little beads of bubbles that float up like you do with champagne. There's a third method. You have forced carbonation and you have bottle conditioning, but you also have what's known as charmat. And you can actually do adding your yeast to, I use a bright tanked corny keg. Put the right dosage of yeast in there to give you the carbonation level that you're looking for. Wait for it to finish, let all the yeast settle out, and then you can use a counter pressure filler to fill up your bottles and cap them, or wire cage down a cork. And by the way, for anybody that doesn't know, the corks on champagne bottles don't come like that with that cool little mushroom thing on it. Basically, they're just longer, regular corks that you put into that wire cage. You use a little tool called a wire turner that basically takes that little loop of wire that you see at the end and cranks down that cap that's on top of it until you get like this little mushroom on top of the cork.
About the only thing I'll add is, just like Billy is, I like carbonating 10, 12, 14% meads. Billy came over to my house a couple months ago, and I gave him a carbonated orange blossom Sauvignon Blanc Piment that I had on tap. There's fun stuff on tap at my house. And but I will factor that into the recipe design, because I try to finish sweeter with less tannins if I know I'm going to carbonate it, because that carbonic acid is going to dry it out. And and if I try to carbonate something that's dry, except for the people who like sours, nobody's really going to like it, because carbonating a dry meat to begin with at 10%, it's not going to go over that well. So
we've only ever done one carbonated mead, but we do a lot of cider as well. So that's nothing I can really add to that. I mean, the carbonic acid is something you need to be aware of, because if it's a certain sweetness and you add carbonation, the perceived sweetness goes down, and that's really what it is.
And if you're skeptical about carbonating meads, Tom Repis, who just won the National Mead Maker of the Year for the AMMA as a home mead maker. He carbonates tons of meads, standard, session, and those are a lot of the times the meads he wins awards with. So it's don't shy away from it. Experiment with it.
Tom's an amazing meat maker.
He is.
All right, what do we got next? Okay, now let's talk clarifying. So we balanced our mead. It has the sweetness, acidity, alcohol, all balanced to where we want it. It's got structure from the tannins. It's carbonated or still, all of that, so it's perfect. And now we want to clear it up. And mead, just like wine, there's still an expectation that a brilliantly clear mead is going to be preferred, and I don't know if that's going to go away anytime. You know, beer now, if it's clear, they'll send it back. Like, give me a hazy. Mead, there's the thing with mead that I've found commercially is we've done some hot meads and served them very hazy, and people loved it. But everywhere in between hazy and clear is that weird area where it just looks unfinished and bad, right? Doesn't mean it tastes bad, but that middle ground is often where you'll see a lot of meads that you're like, oh man, this would be so much better if it was clear. So we'll talk about how to do that. At the home level, there is super clear, which is I always use, is fantastic. It's a dual stage, meaning it has both positive charged and negative charged clarifying agents. So you add those, one, forget which one first, one, then an hour later the next one. They work together to drop everything out, and it's still gentle on the mead. And that's one point where if you go from industry to industry, people use different clarifying agents, right? If you talk to brewers, they are big on some that you really don't see in the mead or wine world. And then in mead and wine, you'll see other ones that you'll never see brewers use. I don't know why, and maybe we can pick Dan's brain, but there's just with wine and mead, what you're aiming for is to do the least amount of damage. If damage is the wrong word. To drop out the least amount of flavor, aroma, and color while still clarifying, right? So you want to do the least amount you need and the whatever will be gentlest on your product. So what people have found work best, super clear, hot mix sparkleoid is really popular, especially in the commercial mead industry. Bentonite in both primary and or secondary is very popular. There's some fantastic meaderies that just use bentonite. And then, as we have discussed, tannins can actually work as a clarifying agent. And so I put the charge next to it. You can see what's positive, what's negatively charged. That's important because, as you can see, some of these will do the opposite thing, right? They'll pull the opposite particle down. So you really need to know what is creating the haze in your mead, and so what charge that is in order to drop it out. And if you don't know, that's where experimenting comes in. But some of these will pull the yeast out, and some won't, right? Some will pull the honey proteins out, and some won't. So that's why it's important to know what the charge of your clarifying agent is. So then I'll open it up, and if you guys have stuff to add on clarifying agent.
Yeah, we used to use sparkleoid when our operation was a little smaller, because you have to boil the water, and we don't use any heat in our meadery, so it's just got too complicated. So we started using bentonite, and that's mostly what we're using is bentonite, and then combined with just filtration, which I don't know if we're going to talk about at all after. Or whatever.
No, so you
probably not as.
Yeah.
But yeah, the bentonite works really well. We've also used isinglass as well, which also works pretty good. Which is the opposite of bentonite. So I think isinglass is a positively charged one. So
Gelatin.
Yes. I think so.
yeah, so so the bentonite in conjunction with the isinglass when we've needed to use that has been really good. And I will also add that if you're using any kind of fruit with a high pectin content, it is very imperative that you're using an enzyme prior to fermentation, because that will be, the pectin haze will be really hard to remove if you don't have it broken down before fermentation, essentially. None of these will really take that out unless you use an enzyme to get rid of it. Yeah.
What was isinglass charge again?
It's positive.
And it's made from squid.
Yeah.
That's that little glass that you see inside the squid when you're cleaning them. I don't know how many people. My family eats squid, so it came from a bunch.
Gelatin was not one. That's one of the.
Yeah.
Oh, I just and this is not a comprehensive list. I just threw up what is what I found to be most common in mead making. But yes, there's a bunch of different options, and really to just know what effect will they have, what are they going to pull out, and then some are more easy to go overboard than others, right? So that's why hot mix sparkaloid has been so popular. Is it's according to the industry, it's harder to overdose and really strip the good things out than it is some of the other clarifying agents. But yeah, this is not a comprehensive list. There's a lot up there or out there that people use that works just perfectly.
Yeah, I pretty much use hot mix sparkloid. It's cheap, keep it on hand, but I have them all because sometimes sparkloid just doesn't work, and people tend to want a second dose. I never second dose. At that point, if it doesn't work, I start sampling and find out why. Yeah, well, maybe I need to do bentonite, maybe I need to do something else, but I would say 95% of the time hot mix sparkloid works for me. And then I also dual filter my meads too, so I go from a 1 micron to a 0.45 micron.
Couple questions online or comments. Matt let us know that I guess Super Clear is now called Dual Fine. So don't search Super Clear. And they're really worried that we're not drinking, so
I'm worried that we're not drinking. Somebody gave me water.
we're
What the crap?
We're gonna be drinking the whole rest of the day. Don't worry, guys. They're very concerned.
I'm concerned. I need a drink.
All right, let's go to. We only have 5 more minutes, so I want to wrap this up, and then we'll all start drinking. Okay, fruit. Well, that's a big one, but for fruit, and then the next slide is spices. We maybe won't get to everything. I guess my point including it on here was that fruit can be added in secondary, and there's still a lot of people that treat it more like a dogma where I only add it in primary, I only add it in secondary, and it's going to give you 2 completely different flavor profiles. So do you want the fermented version of the fruit, or do you want the not fermented version of the fruit? And whatever that is, do that. Like, you don't need to follow a rule when it comes to that. It's the same thing with spices and everything else, but especially fruit, because adding fruit in primary will ferment it and give you a completely different flavor, right? Think of wine and grape juice. So know what you want, and then that will dictate when you add the fruit. Carvin did a fantastic presentation at not the Mesa Cup, the AIMA Mead Conference, where he had a melomel where all in primary, all in secondary, half and half, and then I think a third or quarter at different times.
I step the fruit throughout fermentation. Long story short, everybody in the room, only one person got all the meads right.
Yeah.
The most popular mead was split between primary and secondary. Everyone seemed to be the unanimous winner so far as the right mix of aromas and taste. And that was my favorite too as well. The one that I split the fruit 50-50 between primary and secondary. So
Balance. What an idea.
I think we still get fit spices in. You guys have anything you want to add to fruit? And
I think you put it perfectly. Yeah, just do what you want to go for. Yeah.
yeah.
Also, don't feel constrained to adding the same fruit in secondary that you started out with in primary. There are a lot of compatible fruits, for lack of a better term, that will help pop that original flavor. Small amounts of banana, large amounts of strawberry, rhubarb. So think about those kind of things that work together. Similar flavors, dark fruits, a bit of red fruit to brighten it up a little bit.
and extraction agents too. I like to use OptiRed for fruit meads. That helps with color extraction and color stabilization. You know, so if you're working with delicate colors to begin with, especially like something like a strawberry mead or whatever it may be, you know, make sure that you use something like OptiRed, which is going to help preserve the color that is there. So
enzyme
as an enzyme. And what Pete says, with strawberry mead, everybody knows that color is hard. Well, one thing I add to my strawberry mead that no judge or anybody's ever picked up is I put hibiscus to help with the color. It brings the color out more. So don't be afraid to a quarter of an ounce or a pound of this. And nobody's gonna pick it up. Besides, when I enter them in comps, I just put berries. I don't list what's in them. So.
And just to talk about the fruit medium, we're a fairly large operation, so we can't use a lot of whole fresh fruit. We do smaller batch things, but we do use a lot of like purees and just juices and things. So don't be afraid to do that too. I mean, whole fresh fruit's really good, obviously, but yeah, works pretty well for us.
Don't limit yourself. Yeah.
Any suggestions on which source of urea?
We just use Oregon fruit.
Oregon fruit is a good place. I probably get 90% of my fruit from Northwest Wild Foods. I would say I love those guys. They have great frozen fruit. Real hard to find stuff too, like red currants, champagne currants, different varieties of black currants, boysenberries, black raspberries, huckleberries,
Cloudberries.
Yeah, they got cloudberries too. They got aronia berries.
Marion berries too.
Yeah, they got those too.
Not the mayor, the actual fruit.
All right, let's actually skip spice, and then what I want to do is go one more slide. This will be our last slide. All right, so you primary fermentation did not go great, right? What do you do? And of course, this never happens to people in this room, but for the people watching, we'll help them out. So, what can you do? Because the great thing about mead is you don't need, if you're not selling it, you don't need to toss it down the drain. There's actually a lot you can do to make it enjoyable, even if it's a pretty rough mead. And then you learn and do it differently next time. So, I'm going to go through the panel. We'll throw out some ideas. So first one is you have rocket fuel. Let's say high temp ferment, yeast really struggled. You have all these fusels and it's just really, really hot. One of the things I've found is that is a perfect for a capsimo, which is a mead made with chili peppers. And so you add enough sweetness to kind of help out the heat there, and then you complement the heat by adding in, let's say, jalapenos, habaneros, chipotle peppers. Suddenly, the rocket fuel is gone, and you just have this great, sweet and spicy mead that is, at least it's enjoyable to cover up some of those flavors. So, rocket fuel, what would you guys do?
Ginger, lemon zest, a little bit of juice, maybe some cinnamon.
I have 4 kids of legal drinking age, and they will drink just about any damn thing. And but I'm gonna take you to number one advice that I give a lot of people: dump it. Don't be afraid to dump stuff. But if the kids won't drink it, I'm just dumping it. That's how I would handle it.
I don't know if that's ever happened to us.
Yeah. That's
Sorry.
no. This is yeah. For home level, if you have some really rough stuff, maybe not something you're going to enter in a competition, but you want to, you know, it's all you got. You don't want to pour it down the drain. What can you do? Another one. Brent, press again. So you have a stuck fermentation. So you got stuck. You tried to throw some really killer yeast in there. It didn't re-ferment. So basically, it's just under attenuated, really overly sweet, and you can't dry it out anymore with yeast. What do? There is what did I put? I put acid is a great way to balance sweetness right, and then you can do that by adding really acidic fruit. So think of something that normally would not be pleasant in a balanced mead, but might balance out a very overly sweet on your under attenuated mead. You could go that route. Other options?
I'll let Carvin talk about blending. I take the sledgehammer approach, which is the Lallemande Restart Stuck Fermentation Protocol. Uvaferm 43 yeast. Make a starter of the similar must that you used in the stuck fermentation. Add 1 gram per gallon of yeast hulls to the one that is stuck. Let that settle out. Rack off of the yeast hulls. Add a half amount to the liter or gallon that you've made of the starter. Keep adding in until all of a sudden everything that was in the stuck fermentation vessel is now in the one that's going like crazy, and you're afraid that it's going to take over your house.
This happens from time to time. You know, sometimes meats just don't finish for whatever reasons. Nobody's fault. Just Odin's. Just you're done. That's all you're gonna get. So I love to keep these meats. I log them and I'll blend them with something later. Like if there's no obvious flaws in it and it's just sweeter than the yeast just quit on me, I'm saving that. I'm gonna blend that with something later. I just log it in a spreadsheet and I put them in kegs, put a little CO2 on them, and just put them in the chest freezer, and I'll go back to them. I'll screw something up or whatever, do something dry that I didn't like, and be like, oh, you know, I got that sweet meat in a chest freezer. I'm gonna blend that. Make it happen. Yeah. That's usually what I do a lot of times, you know, and so it works out well. Blending is your friend. Have a blending party. Blend stuff together. We do it all the time. You know, like just start mixing meats together, and sometimes you come up with great combos.
Meat against human.
This has happened to us. Barrel aging too is another thing. Tannins, like kind of like acid, just bring the balance of the sweetness. That's, I would say, is the main thing we would do.
Or carbonate it too.
Yeah, or carbonate it.
Yeah.
All right, we're out of time. So I really want to thank our panelists for being here. None of them live in San Diego, so thank you to them. So as we wrap up, we are open now. We have some really cool meads. Some of you guys have got the anniversary flight. We have a bottle release that's not available in the flight, our chocolate boucher, which is awesome. We have our collab with Superstition as part of the anniversary flight, which is, of course, amazing because they did it. And if I could get everyone to help, we need 2 of these tables, 2 of the big ones and 1 of the little ones back outside, along with 4 stools per table. And then I think that's all we need from you guys. Thank you guys for coming, and hopefully you can stick around and drink some mead with us.
Thanks, Billy.
All right. Cool.
That was really great. I really enjoyed the NHC presentation.
Oh,
the
thank
panel.
you.
That was my favorite panel.
Yeah, even though they just threw me in there, it's like, oh, can't find anybody else. You know, want to do a panel?
Yeah, you did a good job. That was
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
So where do you live? So I know where the
Arizona.
All right. So next time we're there, we'll get your tasting. Yeah, you guys. I see your Coast Guard?
No, I'm in Mesa. Yeah.
So you're in Mesa? Yeah, I've been to you guys several times.
What's up? Did you say Basin?
No, Mesa. Mesa.